Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're back with a DADCAW. It is Friday, the 5th of June, 2020, 6:39 p.m., which has 69 in it, so nice. Today's DADCAW is about change. Now, when you go through puberty, you experience a certain kind of change that you simply have no control over, and it's probably quite uncomfortable, I would imagine, because you have no idea what the hell's happening, and then you gotta get sat down and talked to by the birds and the bees talk, by your father, or you just watch porn, I guess. I don't know, whatever your education comes from, wherever your education comes from. Mine came from America, in case you couldn't tell. So, that was the segue into today's topic, because change in more domestic and common cases is not something that is irrevocable, is not something that is unavoidable. It's something that must be opted into, usually. Now, again, there's some kinds of forced change, and it's more than just your puberty. It's also like if you lose your job because of a fucking pandemic or something. Nothing topical, of course, just something that occurred to me just now. I don't know why. But generally speaking, you're going to be opting into change when change actually happens. And a lot of the times people don't want to do any change because of the process of getting from point A to point B. I mean, that is the process of change, is going from one state to the next. Migration of some sort between where you are now and where you will be in the future once the changing process is over. That's just one simple way that humans can compartmentalize it, I suppose, because conceptualizing it that way is helpful, even though the change really never stops. Just like if you're lucky and if you're playing your cards right, you'll never stop learning about stuff. You'll never stop seeing avenues for you to improve. But the change is the act of doing that improvement, and it can come really, really hard, insofar as it can be really difficult to actually wind up with enough motivation to enact such change into your life. So what is this DADCAW really about? It is really about change, and lately we've been doing some changing. We've been experimenting with new commands. We've been, in AI script, of course, we've been experimenting with new syntax with the help of Veek's alias system, and that seems to be sticking so far, with some performance improvements in the conversion of such a system. And that means that we are able to get quite a bit of work done in a shorter amount of time. But I gotta admit, I was definitely feeling some resistance when it came to actually enacting that change, to assisting Veek in the process of his aliases, or iQuare in the process of testing his new AI commands. Now, I did it anyway, and I would definitely gladly do it, because that means that we'll have better tools at our disposal. The act of me testing this stuff out and just immersing myself with them will improve my understanding of these new tools that we have, and it will build memory, muscle memory, and stuff like that that I will then draw upon whenever I'm working with anything else in the future, as far as these tools go anyway. And it will lead to net improvements in my pipeline, my workflow, and presumably in everybody else's workflow when they do decide to take advantage of these tools. It'll at least be an option for other people, even if it's not acted upon by everyone. By being a part of the process by which these tools are then brought to the public, I can feel like I did my part in that respect, which is worthwhile in and of itself. But I also have better tools at my disposal now. I am ensuring the propagation of additional tools as time goes on, and that to me is very important. And that is one of the main justifications, rationalizations for actually doing the work that is required in order to enact that change. It's just that it's not easy. I definitely had some pretty significant, like I said, I had some tough asks ahead of myself. I had a lot of resistance to the idea of going through all that change. Lately we've set up a bunch of GitHubs for the Python modding suite, for the 2 Hydra plugins, for the actual Hydra commit itself that you can download the beta from. And getting to the point where I could do that was, fraught with resistance. And some of it was externalized in some capacity that I had some responsibility for, because I forgot my password for an old GitHub account. And so I had to use a dummy GitHub account now, because I wanted to make this change happen now instead of putting it off until I got my real account back. And so that was kind of resistance in that sense. Like, do I really want to use my dummy account for this? Or, should I just wait for GitHub to release my username so I can go get my old account back? I think instead it makes more sense, even though it's going to lead to slightly more overhead in the future when I do end up getting that username back, and I do want to secure that username, assuming I even want to, give a fuck about that. But at that point, I would get to eventually get to the point where I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm going to have to transition the ownership of the, repos that I have into the hands of the new account, because I have to set up a new account because of that password thing that I mentioned. And that was resistance. Even that small amount of thing there, that was enough to justify for at least a whole day when I first had the idea to do it, that I should not do that work. And obviously now I did do that work, and I'm glad that I did that work, because now we have GitHub as a way to download these files and manage these files, which is way better than, obviously it's infinitely better than Mega in terms of how fast it downloads, how fast it uploads, how responsive it is in your computer, because you're using external software in order to upload this stuff and manage this stuff and download it. So you're not interacting with a shitty web browser and a shitty, poorly coded, poorly programmed website on top of it all. So while it's not a solution for everything, because obviously there's a much heftier file size limit on Mega than there is on GitHub. Like, you can put way more on Mega by comparison. So I can't say that I'm never going to use Mega again. I'm still going to actively use Mega. But at the very least, I've been able to now migrate the a lot of the tools and utilities and stuff that are linked all over the place in terms of what files are available. And where they are available. They're hyperlinked all over the place on my wiki. Now I have just a few different central areas. You can download the new game state plugin from here. Here's its source. And you can download the, whatever else, the actual Hydra files from here, and it's easier than it was on Mega, and they're organized in a bit of a cleaner way, because just by virtue of it being on a different website than Mega, honestly. And so, all of this has changed. And of course, the pipeline change is a bit more significant than just where the files are located, in my opinion, because the pipeline is stuff I'm going to be interacting with all the time, many times a day, versus just uploading a new version once or twice a day at most, unless something crazy happens, of course. But that's basically where we're at in terms of the change that we've experienced personally. And I think that's changed for the better, obviously, but getting to the point where we could say, oh yeah, that change is done. We've taken care of it. We're now at the changed state, the destination we were heading towards when we started to do all that work. It's not easy. And it is indeed the fundamental problem with doing anything, because actually creating a project is change, because you're changing your project from not existing to existing on a fundamental level. And so you can boil it down to that level, where it's like resistance is just everywhere in that capacity. It's not just with change, but it's also with creation, because creation is an act of creating change, right? Or changing something to exist in the first place. So it can get a little epistemological and vague, and maybe not very useful when you break it down that way, but I just figured I would leave that little extra nugget there. And honestly, as far as I'm concerned, change is a better way to conceptualize it, a more useful way to conceptualize it for humans, because we look at change and we say, that person has changed for the better, or sometimes for the worse. That person has changed their tune. They've changed up their pipeline. They've improved something about themselves, and we do oftentimes conceptualize change more so than we conceptualize or relate to the idea of just improvement as a whole. It's almost like, oh, that person changed. Like, it's an easier concept to grasp than whatever for whatever reason, I feel like we just take to it at a much more subconscious level. Because if we're talking about improvement, then we're wondering, well, how did they improve, and what did they improve about? But if you say, like, I improved my pipeline for this, it kind of hides the work involved almost. But if you say I changed my pipeline in this, well, you can then add a qualifier for the better. Now it's better in this way or whatever, just like you could have said so with improving. But in some capacity, I feel like we instinctively recognize the effort required to actually make a change in the first place, which is one of the reasons why it probably ends up being used in our vernacular more often than improve, or any other term that might work there is as a synonym perhaps, or a replacement word. But as far as I'm concerned, change is the really, really good thing to have in your arsenal. The ability to change, the ability to adapt and evolve, and basically just update yourself every now and then. Update your belief systems or whatever, but also update your actual pipeline and how you go about the world, and your software, if you will, your firmware perhaps, your firm, lengthy, veiny hardware. Fuck, I fucked up my own joke. Well, that's nothing new. I haven't changed in that respect, that's for sure. So that all being said, I suppose this is definitely a bit of a more meandering episode than I intended it to be initially when I thought of the idea of talking about change. But yeah, change is it's not easy, but it's really important. It's incredibly important. And you have to be willing to put in the hard yards necessary to make that change happen. And sometimes change can be as simple as just fixing a line of code in a project or a program or an AI. But a lot of the times it involves constant, updating. Like the Melee AI by itself was a huge amount of change where I completely changed the way that I conceptualize AI in terms of a code-based level. And it involved changing a lot about how I programmed that AI. And obviously, a lot of this episode has been talking about change that I've done or helped with specifically, because that's what immediately comes to mind now. I just finished doing a bunch of stuff with Veek where we were both working on the aliases and stuff. So I guess I'll break it down to you this way. Just the aliases by themselves involved changing the Python files. Like Veek and I were both doing that, mostly him. Changing the scripts that I was experimenting with and constantly going through and changing a whole bunch of different things about like what keywords I was using. So instead of the commands, I would actually use the aliases, and then I would use, he made a benchmark so we could test performance on converting them all and all that stuff. So we went back and forth on that for a while. And it also involved changing the extended AI command guide, and eventually will involve changing the regular AI command guide to include the aliases that we've added and all that stuff. So it's really not... It's not nothing. There's a lot of different aspects, a lot of different pages on the Wikidot, and a lot of different aspects of the different GitHubs, and obviously the aspects of my own scripts that needed to be edited just to facilitate the proper testing and authorization, if you will, or approval of this particular case, of the idea that you're looking at something that is worth adding to our repertoire of tools. And when you verify that, which this is the verification process, really, that's when you can say, okay, now we're good to go. But that process is not always an easy one, and sometimes results in refactoring of code. Like Veek had to do that for his performance errors or issues. And now it's much better, obviously, so that's good. And now the tool is there for everybody. So at the end of the day, it's obviously worth the effort, but you got to make sure that you're not expecting it to be done immediately. And we've talked about this on the podcast, Mesk and I, quite a bit. Just the idea that people come into the, whatever concept they have or preconceived notions of project development, they think they'll get it done very, very quickly. Or maybe if speed isn't on their mind, easy, like whether or not it's easy, that might be on their mind. They might be like, oh yeah, it'll be easy. It might take some time because it'll be like repetitive work, but it'll be easy. And very often they'll get incredibly demotivated when it turns out that that's not true. And I think this is their failure to change, because instead of changing their understanding of things, where previously they understood the process to be easy or quick, and now they're seeing that it's not going to be easy or quick, rather than just changing their understanding and accepting that, they end up getting demotivated. It's one thing to really honestly assess whether or not you'd be willing to continue the work, and another thing to just sort of essentially use your preconceived notions as an excuse, which I think is what most people are doing in that capacity. They're either using it as an excuse to churn out lower quality content because they're not willing to learn whatever they need to learn in order to make higher quality content, or they use it as an excuse to drop the platform altogether. And only sometimes that is really not always a valid thing to do in that capacity. Insofar as obviously you can do whatever you want, but if you're going to start exploring stuff and you're going to ask people for help with project creation, and then you just fuck off when you realize it's going to take a while, you definitely waste the time investment of other people at that point. So I would say it's rather irresponsible to do, even if it's not, obviously I can't control what people do in that respect, nor would I want to. But if I could ask anything of people, I would say, make sure that you're interested in, learning yourself and improving as an individual before you start asking people for help, least of all me. I'm very busy. And that is the change, man. That is the change that we can all caw behind. And that's the DADCAW. So hopefully you found it thought-provoking. Like I said, it was not very cogent, unfortunately. I thought it would be a little bit more to the point, but this heat has changed me for the worse. Because holy shit, is it hot. So I'm going to go before I melt. And yeah, I'll see you next time.